As we begin today, I want to acknowledge that I am located in Lloydminster on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan in the heart of Treaty 6 territory. Before the arrival of the explorers and settlers, many First Nations traveled through and thrived in this area, which also includes the homeland of the Métis. I was born here, but I chose to return here as an adult. And now, after unlearning what I was taught in public school in the 1970s and 1980s, and relearning a less whitewashed history of this place, I see this land and its stories through very different eyes. I acknowledge that the roots of my family on the prairies came at the cost of the First Nations people who were here long before. Their land was taken so that my ancestors could farm and build their lives in this place that became known as Canada. I cannot change the past, but I can try to move forward in a good way by sharing what I've learned about the Indigenous peoples whose teachings are so intricately tied to this land and all it encompasses. In this episode, we begin with a discussion about Wes Fine's great-grandfather, who was a highly respected warrior chief for pound maker in what is now known as Saskatchewan. Fine was one of the primary sources for David Mandelbaum, an American anthropologist who spent time on the prairies researching the Plains Cree. As such, Fine is mentioned in many historical accounts, has had a book written about him, and is featured in an exhibit in the Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton. We also discuss the role of museums and other institutions in housing the belongings of Indigenous ancestors. As we look back in history, we end with hope for the future. Mr. Fine is sharing stories as he knows and has experienced them, which may differ from those told within other Indigenous communities and settler institutions. Throughout the series, we discuss various plants and traditional healing methods. This is not intended to replace medical advice from trained healthcare providers. Some episodes contain graphic descriptions of events witnessed and experienced by the guest at his time in residential school and at various points throughout his life. They may spark memories and questions, so we are asked to listen with open hearts and minds. Viewer discretion is advised. I was wondering whether we talked a little bit about museums, and I was thinking of Old Fine Day's place in the Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton. Would you like to talk a bit about Old Fine Day today?
Kamiyukishi Quill. Yeah. Now, that was my mother's grandfather. My mother's father was Sam Fine Day, and her mother was Helen Fine Day, who used to be a Gardapi from Montana. And Sam's mother was Tutus, and Sam's father was Kamiyukishi or Fine Day. Sam's mother, Tutus, had come from the young Chipewyan band after 1896, when that reserve was no longer recognized as being a reserve, and it was taken over by the government, or maybe church, I'm not sure. Somebody sold it to farmers, eh? Could have been the government, the Indian agent, or the priest. He all probably had a hand in it. But Tutus came from there, and when she was living in young Chipewyan band's camp, she was living with a man named Kaskitiwawaske, a black elk was his name. And she had a boy with that man, Black Elk. And when she came to live with Fine Day in Sweetgrass, she had that boy already. And he was taken and registered as John Fine Day by the Indian agent. Mustosawasis, Buffalo Child, is what the people called him. And, Buffalo Child married a woman named Betsy, And she had a son named Archie Fine, and that line ended there. No more, no more. But, so Archie, who was the son of Buffalo Child, would have been my grandfather's nephew. And Fine Day, he had come from north and west, he said, and he had, there was some Soto, Cree, Stony in the background, And when, when he was a young man, he wanted to be a warrior. And so he used to follow the men on raids into enemy country and, got quite adept at it and, managed to bring back some horses and things like that from his trips. But he eventually ended up, in fact, one time they were trapped, it was said, by near an enemy camp. They had taken refuge in a hill with a bush on top. But enemy warriors had circled that hill, and they built fires all around. They were firing at these guys on top of the hill. And these guys on the hill were firing back. And I believe I think Thunderchild may have been in that one too, along with Fine Day and some other warriors. But Fine Day, he stood out front and kept firing shots at those people and was visible to them. They were firing at him. It was Sweetgrass that was there, and Sweetgrass had his robe. It had feathers on it. All down the back and the sides. And he wore it, and it hung to his, just above his knees. And Fine Day had been standing out on the hill for half a day. And he looked back into the pit that they had dug out. It was just a little pit that they could lie in to keep out of the line of fire. But he looked back and he said, I'm getting tired of standing out here. I'm gonna have a little rest, he said. Somebody else come out here. And I believe it was Sweetgrass that said, I'll do this for a while. And Fine Day went in, and he laid down. And while he was lying in that pit, he fell asleep. Meantime, Sweetgrass was out here, and the enemy was firing shots at him. Kamiyukisi fell asleep, and when he was sleeping, he dreamed. And the snake came to him. It was a rattlesnake. And that rattlesnake came right up to where he was and told him, Tau mga kaskitan kawichitan. I could help you. I have the power to help you. And finally he said, can you help us escape from here? These guys have us surrounded, and they have fires. We can't sneak by them. But if you help us out, he told that snake, when I get home, I'll go and buy some cloths to hang out for you. And I'll take tobacco, put it with those cloths, and I'll make a feast. I'll have a feast, invite people to a feast in your honor. Because of your benevolence, you came and you saved us from certain death. And for that, I am so thankful, and I will have these ceremonies for you, if you help us. And that snake said, oh, you have to do exactly as I tell you. If you want to live, lie down on the ground. Tell your friends to lie down behind you. And I'm going to be in front here. I'm going to crawl down. And you follow the path that I take. Don't go off anywhere else, otherwise you'll get killed. And that snake took them down the hill right beside one of those fires and past it and beyond. And when they were beyond, those guys all jumped up and started running. They ran all that night and didn't stop until morning. And when they stopped on a hill where they could see for a long ways around, so they would know if they were being chased. And they sat there all afternoon, but didn't see any sign of anybody chasing them, so they made their way home. And when Fine Day got home, he had a feast for that rattlesnake. And he had Tutus make him a rattlesnake belt. That's the one that's in that museum, eh? And the Rattler Warrior Society was a warrior society, became a warrior society that was reserved only for the bravest of the brave. You had to prove yourself as exceptionally dedicated and brave and prepared to defend your community with your life if it took that. And then you might receive an invitation from the little rattlers. And usually, if someone died who was a member of that, they would invite someone else to come in and replace them. But it would have to be a very recognized warrior before you could become a member of that. And after Fine Day had that feast and, thanked that snake, and he became the head of that little Rattler Warrior Society. He was the head man. And in that Warrior's Lodge, they had a fire. No one could come between the fire and Fine Day, because that fire represents life. And you don't come between the fire and your leader. Yeah, you go around. And so there was all kinds of rules like that, where they had to acknowledge his presence,
So in the history books, he's known as the warrior chief to pound maker. Is that correct?
They say war chief of Poundmaker, but actually there was no war chiefs. It was warrior chiefs who lived according to warrior laws, you see. A war chief, there is no laws. A warrior chief has very strict set of rules to abide by. You cannot annihilate a whole party of people. Always one has to be left to go back to their community and tell the story of what happened so they can have closure, you see. That was a law for the warrior societies. That was one of the laws. And, you couldn't just go around killing. I mean, you had to have purpose. It had to be for your community, for your family, in order for you to, whether it's to provide or to protect. That was just part of the life at that point. And there are so many stories of Fine Day and his interactions with the spirits and his exploits, not only as a warrior, but as a shaman. And it was said, for instance, when Mandelbaum came in 1936, wanting to know information, a lot of the people were quite willing to talk to him. But nobody would talk to him about anything ceremonial or spiritual, you know. And finally, Masqua told Mandelbaum, you keep asking about these things, about spirits and about ceremony. And we can't tell you that because we're afraid of the spirits. If we misinterpret or, accidentally tell you something that's wrong, we will pay. You should go and see Findy. He doesn't fear the spirits. He's on terms with them. He interacts with it. And if he's willing to speak to you, then you will know that what you're speaking, what he's telling you, is the truth. Because that's who he is.
And so Mandelbaum was an American anthropologist. He was a student.
From New York, I think. No, from California. He ended up in California, but I think his thesis, The Plains Cree, ended up in New York, along with the chief's son's hand bundle that Big Bear used to have, but that he transferred to Findy. So those things ended up in New York. And Mandelbaum came back to Sweetgrass in 1979. But all the old people he knew had died. And there was just a whole bunch of new elders and stuff that he got to meet.
And he was interested in kind of preserving the stories of the people, and especially the war stories, kind of recognizing that the warrior stories, recognizing that this would be the end of an era, and there would be people who wouldn't be able to tell those stories, or before the people were gone to capture those stories.
Yeah. The old ways, the old stories and the old ways, and there was no one left to speak of that and to remember those ones. And memory is such an important thing to remember. It's such a critical thing, especially once your body is gone, all that is left is your soul and your emotions and your thoughts. And it's important to remember that part of you, you see, to keep you connected to the moment, to keep you connected to the line that will be moving along, even as you have moved along, There will be thousands of people after you, but they may not look like you. They're going to evolve. They have to evolve. Because the world is evolving. And so they may have different attributes, different shaped bodies, but, they'll still have your DNA. Yeah. And that's, when I talk about you have a plant, put it in your hand. You're transferring information. What information it wants from you is your DNA. It's not interested in last week or next week. I mean, what it wants is your ancient memories, this body. And, what shape is it in now? What do you need? And then when you take that seed planted in the ground, what it does, it tells the Earth Mother what your body needs. And the Earth Mother sends that medicine into that plant. And that plant then becomes your medicine, not just your food, your medicine, because now it can heal you. It can set the things that are wrong with you right so that you will be healthy.
So you touched on museums before, and in this idea of, museums as a place of preservation, but generally very colonial spaces. And, there's pushes for repatriation where, artifacts, ancestors' remains have ended up in museums and, they should go back to the communities. And so what's your feeling on that or your opinion, perspective on that?
Well, it depends on what the so-called artifacts are. For instance, there is no point in repatriating. Repatriate to where and to what? We want the bones to go back to the land. It shouldn't be disturbed anyway, but since they were, all these grave goods, they should be in institutions that are under the control of Indigenous people and communities. But there are no institutions like that, and our people are not trained in that field. And so that will require training. That will require resources for the initial funding that will be required to set up these things, as well as training for that. And, a lot of, that's what's happened to a lot of stuff, though, is, we say we're going to make things better and, okay, well, we'll hire an Indian to work in the museum. I won't give him anything to do. You just give him an office and he can come there and drink coffee or whatever, Or if anybody wants to talk to an elder, well, he's there,
We'll check a box.
Yeah. But there's things for sure that have no business in museums. The medicines. The pipe stems. When I was in Norway, I saw pipe stems like that long. And they were twisted. But they still worked. The kind of workmanship that had to go into making stuff like that, and to understand trees and which trees, and everything they had in that museum I smudged. And they said that the last person that had been there was a man named Archie Black Elk from the American Dakota Sioux community. And they said he had spent all his time yelling at them about what they were doing wrong. And he hadn't done anything. And I just wanted to make sure those things were smudged. And the drums. My God, the drums. They even had Sami drums. So it's illegal for Samis to have drums anymore, because they could use them for calling spirits, Yeah, but all the different artifacts that were there, and there was so much North American stuff, and that's, how I got to becoming interested in how did that stuff get there. There was not that many traders that used to come there, but 1885, General Middleton filled up 2 train loads of railway cars of stuff that he stole from Paul Maker's camp in Battleford. Buffalo hides, buffalo robes, smoke tents, pipes, and, all of these things. Put them on a train, sent them to the coast, and they got shipped over to London, and they were auctioned off. And Middleton fled. Never came back, because he was going to get charged for, I don't know, stealing stuff, I guess. But apparently he wasn't supposed to take that stuff.
So I remember one day asking you about Old Fine Day's headdress, and there's the picture that hangs in your house, and I asked you about that headdress, and at the time you didn't know where it had ended up. And then I don't know, however many months later, and the new Ram Museum in Edmonton had opened, and I was at my first visit there, and I went through the residential school exhibit, and I walked out, and I turned, and Old Fine Day was standing there in front of me, and I started to cry, and I phoned you from the museum, and you said, I found Old Fine Day's headdress. It's here in the museum, and they have featured him. And I don't think you didn't know that that was happening at the time.
No, I didn't know that had happened. You see, the last time I saw that hat was at Calgary, in that guy's basement, and I asked him if he would let me have it for $5,000. And he said, I can get a lot more from the government. And so that was the end of that discussion. I mean, I have been trying to travel around collecting stuff. I found Old Fine Day's breastplate in Silton, Saskatchewan. It was owned by a woman named Hope Simmons, whose husband used to be Bob Simmons, who was a natural resources guy. The Indians called him Âsokan, the moose chief. But Fine Day gave him a breastplate that he had. And then when Simmons died, I happened to meet his wife. And when she heard my name, she said, you know, my husband used to know a Fine Day, an old man. You should come over to my house, she said. And so I went with her to her house. And we walked in there, and there's a sawhorse. It has a saddle on it and a bridle. And, you know, and she didn't have horses. And she said, oh, well, after my husband died, I just left everything the way it was, the way he left it, you know. And there's that breastplate he got off your great-grandfather. And there it was hanging, you know. And I thought, okay, now I know where that is. Someday, you know, when I get some money, maybe I'll come and approach her. But I'm unemployed and I can't just beg for it, so I left. And then I heard she had died. And I was looking around. I went to the museum in Regina thinking maybe they had gotten those things gifted to them. But one guy there said, no, you know, what happened to those things? He said they were auctioned, they were sent to Calgary to be auctioned off, all of that guy's belongings. And, you know, if your great-grandfather's breastplate was there. And I don't think it had any information or, you know, saying this was from Fine Day. It just was a breastplate hanging. So I don't know. Whoever bought it, you know, wouldn't have known where it came from or any history behind it. So I lost track of that one again. But throughout the years in my travels, I keep coming upon stuff that used to belong to Old Fine Day.
So do you want to talk about the ceremonies, the feasts that the family has done at the museum?
Yeah. Well, once, you know, we discovered where that was, and I mean, Max had meetings there at one point, so he had gone to the museum and asked about that, and they took it and showed it to him, and he told them that those required ceremony, and that he wanted to come and have a feast here. And they were really helpful. They provided a room, and they provided a person, and they brought all those out and displayed them where the families could see them, which had me a little concerned because, okay, you guys, I want all your pockets hanging inside out. Yeah, but two, like one of the women wanted to run up and grab that headdress, and I said, oh, you don't just run up and grab ceremonial things, especially warriors' headdresses, Yeah. And I have my pipes here. Don't step over those either, don't come near those, especially for women in their moon time, because it's too powerful. You have too powerful things in a confined space, and you never know what can happen, so better to be safe. But we did have our feast, and actually there was quite a few more people than I thought would show up. Yeah.
Well, and there were items that are on display, but then there's some items that are kind of back in the back rooms and not on display.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I came to the second ceremony and they brought those out, but I mean, we were able to touch them on the tables. Like I thought, oh, you'd have to have white gloves and yeah. But I mean, they were very open and
Yeah. It was more about accommodating the community than about their professional training. Yeah. So those compromises that have to be made to ensure that things go smoothly and get done. But yeah, that was a wonderful feast. My sisters came down, which I was surprised by.
But I mean, these are, officially they're acts of reconciliation, but it's just doing the right thing.
Yeah. And I mean, we're moving towards reconciliation, but I mean, we still need the resources to build places like this so we can keep those things, if that's what's meant to be. And if they're not meant to be there, well, then they won't stay there. The spirits will move them.
Well, and I think you had told me at one time when I asked about the headdress and, the idea that it's in safe hands. It's where it needs to be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't necessarily be in somebody's home.
No, not under somebody's bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what happened with a lot of the goods of the old warriors. People were so impoverished that they began to sell even their most valuable things for trinkets, for food. So something that might have cost 4 horses to acquire, all of a sudden is worth $40 to a white person.
But then as an Indigenous person, well, now I've got $40 cash.
Yeah.
And I can go do whatever I want with it.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned Big Bear's bundle that was passed to Old Fine Day, and then Old Fine Day passed it on to Mandelbaum, and it ended up in
The
museum in New York.
Natural History in New York. And they say that it is 5 stories underground. And the guy who told me that was it was a white guy who was researcher. And he said he got special access to go and view that. And they took him downstairs into a room, had a table, and they took that bundle and opened it up so he could see it. But he said, the moment I walked in that room, I don't know what happened, he said. I just felt this terror. And I couldn't even go to that table, he said. I had to turn around and walk out. I had to tell him I couldn't stay in that room, you know. So he was meant to be in its presence. Yeah.
And so as far as you know, that bundle has never had ceremony done for it.
Not while it's been in, well, not since Fine Day had it.
Yeah.
Not. Although he had told Mandelbaum the ceremony and also the songs. And probably Mandelbaum, I wonder how I guess he wouldn't have had a recorder at that point. But,
And Mandelbaum would have been relying on a translator.
right.
Right.
And Mandelbaum's translators were, I can't remember. I wonder if he could talk or understand. He couldn't talk Cree. I mean, because my mother said him and Fine Day used to go and sit under that maple tree, and Fine Day would tell stories, and Mandelbaum would be writing them down. They must have had someone there interpreting, translating.
And he may have picked up a bit of the language over time, but
Yeah.
I just wonder, I can't imagine, even as a researcher, but as a human and having spent time in the community, I can't imagine that he fully understood what that bundle meant.
Yeah.
If he turned it over to the museum.
Mm-hmm.
Like there had
It
to
was
have been
just part
something.
of his job.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, as far as the spirits are concerned, that was a safe place to put that, you know.
Because that bundle
it
could have
would-
been lost.
Yeah. Otherwise, who knows where it would have ended up.
Right. And so if it is meant to make its way back
Yeah.
to these lands, that might happen when the time and the place and the people and the opportunities are right.
Yeah. And it's not that we are devoid of that. I mean, we're still involved in that. For instance, these things that we do, for instance, and the bundles that I and my boys have, you know, like I have Chief's Son's Hand bundle, you know.
And Chief Son's Hand is referring to the bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chief's son, the bear. And there's the Wapimasqua and Mistahaya, the great bear, you know, and Kaskiteumasqua, the black bear. Yeah. I mean, all of these ones. And Musquasis. But Fine Day had a necklace. It had bear claws, grizzly bear claws on it, that he used to wear. And he used to tell a story about this man that lived before his time. Maybe when he was a boy, that man was alive. Because he said at that time there was lots of grizzly bears on the prairies. They used to hunt buffalo. And one time there was one spotted by some hunters. And when that bear ran into a grove of willows, you know, they kind of went around it. But only one guy decided to go in after it, and he went into the bush and actually encountered that bear, and that bear took and swiped him and put a hole in his throat, like that. And like right in his neck. And after that, you know, that guy, Toll would whistle. And if he wanted to talk, he had to close that hole, eh? But when he wasn't, it would whistle, and so, you know, he was called Whistling Wind. Kiskusiu Yutin. Kiskusiu, the whistler. But that was from that fight with that bear. Yeah. So many stories of bears in the beginning, you know. They were side by side with humans, all the way through, until the recent past. Yeah, when everything was fenced off and changed into its own place, you know. Yeah.
On that idea, I mean, people say brother bear, but I mean, literally, the bear is a brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, in the history of the world, I mean, there have been certain powers and certain powerful entities, and they still exist. But for instance, the ones who can change form. You know, there was even people who could do that. And I remember stories of one of my friend's grandparents who was able to do that, and how when he was really old, in his 90s, when he wanted to go somewhere or do something, you know, he had business on his mind, he would smoke, and then he would take off, and he would fall down. And as he was falling, he would turn. And when he turned, where there had been a man, an animal would get up and just streak off into the bush. That was his grandfather's way of traveling, eh? Yeah.
So is that the term shapeshifters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, scheme walk. That's right. The shapeshift, transform.
And again, our human minds think that's not possible.
Mm-hmm. And there is so many things that we stop ourselves from being involved in because we say, oh, it's not possible. Because it requires effort. And I mean, you get those abilities because you have suffered. You have suffered to earn those supernatural abilities. It's interesting, you know, the processes you have to go through. Fasting, you know, not drinking water, not eating food, just staying in one position for hours at a time, and all of that.
Discipline. Any last words? Any last thoughts before we wrap up for today?
You know, when I think about these things, and I mean, we get closer and closer to an understanding by being able to hear and listen to stories. It will expand not only the mind, but it will make possible things of the heart and the soul too. And it's important now, especially now, in this day and age, and with the condition that we find ourselves with, the environment, you know, and all the warnings that keep coming at us about our environment and how we're you know, doing it in. And, you know, our young people, I keep thinking it's the young people I want to speak with. Old people, they're set. You know, they think they know it all. And this is what their know-it-all has brought on us. We have to have a new dream, a new journey that our young, untainted, innocent minds can conceive of before they get educated and before they become crushed and feel irrelevant, you know. So I'm always hoping, young people, come and listen. There are stories of journeys that have yet to be taken, trails to be traveled, and they're not for the faint or simple-minded. These are journeys that will awaken the warrior, the visionary, the shaman, the magician within each of us. Because that's what we need to change what we have broken, to repair what we have broken. It's going to take the greatest aspects of who we as humans can be to heal ourselves and to heal the earth. Écoutez, Pitama. So that's the thing. Our young people. Save our young people so they can save us. We can save each other.
Hi.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Oh, pues.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you to Mr. Fine for his time and stories. Special thanks to the Lloydminster Public School Division Prairie Thunder Boys Drum Group for providing the music for our podcast. We also want to acknowledge Lakeland College for the use of space and equipment, as well as TELUS STORYHIVE for their support.